our role as an evolutionary movement with this idea of spiritual family as stabilizing and providing continuity is a critical role for us to be engaged in.
As a community, we need to be just a hair more strategic how we market these things.
Today, we welcome Marvin Gawryn. He's a dedicated reader of the Urantia movement, and he's a lifelong advocate for spiritual growth and community service. Marvin discovered the Urantia Book 57 years ago and has since led to weekly study groups. He's presented workshops. He's served in leadership roles within the Urantia community. He's a member of the board of directors of Urantia University, and he hosts an online worship service every Sunday.
Marvin is the author of Reaching High, The Psychology of Spiritual Living, and is semi-retired after a 30-year career as a family therapist. He and his wife, Frantel, are blessed with 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren, reflecting the family values that he so passionately advocates.
Hi, Bill and Cher. Thank you so much. Our title for this part of the conversation today is Uplifting Global Culture with the Family of God Symbolism. So we're going to be talking a lot about things that are described in one of the most cogent and thought-provoking sections in the Urantia book, section 87.7, which is entitled The Nature of Cultism. And what they're really talking about in that section, the revelators are focusing on the formation of what they describe as a symbolic spiritual culture. And what they say is that this new symbolic spiritual culture must emerge really desirably, out of the evolutionary movement around the Urantia revelation. So what I'd like to do is start off by defining a couple of terms. One is culture, and the other is symbolism. And they use both of these terms a great deal in section 87.7 on the nature of cultism. And so when you think about culture, it's each of these subjects, culture and symbolism, fill whole libraries. They're major disciplines, so they're vast subjects, each of them unto themselves. But I'm going to try and simplify what those two terms mean, because they use them over and over again in this section on the nature of cultism. So culture, in a sense, is the whole way that we customarily live. Right? It's our primary spiritual or cosmic conception of who we are and the reality that we are part of. And so culture, in a sense, forms the basis of many of our reoccurring thoughts and feelings and our outlook on both ourselves and on our world. And these cultural conceptions are very powerful influences on our major life decisions and our actions, the primary directions that we take in life. So culture, right? And this whole cultural system is often embodied or captured, in a sense, in what the revelators call a symbolism, which is a fascinating term. A symbolism is sort of captured by a key symbolic phrase that labels it, in a sense, that conveys it, and that offers a handle for communicating it, right? And that key phrase, symbolic phrase, underneath it subsumes a whole set of elements that are held and summarized within this symbolism, right? So a symbolism, in a sense, is a way of holding on to this whole culture, or this whole way of life, and fostering the realization, the actualization of that culture, that whole way of life. So what the symbolism does is it helps us in realizing, making a living reality out of our relationships with God and with each other. So it communicates an ideal that then allows us to begin increasingly to live out that ideal in our lives with God and with each other. And in a sense, also, the symbolism is a way of communicating this culture to each other, spreading it and growing it as a broader cultural influence into the world at large. And the revelators describe this symbolism. This is such amazing language. It's so precise. They describe this symbolism as, quote, the skeletal, this is the last paragraph in section 87.7. I think it's paragraph 10. The skeletal structure around which grows the living and dynamic body of personal spiritual experience. So there's that passage at the top. This symbolism is, in a sense, the skeletal structure around which grows the living and dynamic body of personal spiritual experience, the personal spiritual culture that we are each cultivating in our lives. They go on to say, and I've paraphrased just a little bit, and you'll see the paraphrases in italics. They say, every inspiring ideal grasps for some perpetuating symbolism, seeks some technique for cultural manifestation, right? So the symbolism looks to be actualized or lived out in the culture, seeks for some technique of cultural manifestation, which will do two things: ensure survival of the ideal and the culture, and augment the realization of that culture, helping to make it become a living reality, an actualized reality. And they say it is regrettable that so many modern believers in moral standards and spiritual ideals have no adequate symbolism, no culture of mutual support. And so I sort of, they say no cult, no cult of mutual support, but really what they're talking about is culture, no culture of mutual support, nothing to belong to. Every new, and this is a striking statement to me, every new revelation of truth, you look at the major revelations, the epical revelation, has given rise to a new symbolic spiritual culture. And even the restatement of the religion of Jesus, which is arguably the Urantia revelation, right? This new presentation of Jesus' essential teachings, even the restatement of the religion of Jesus must develop a new and appropriate symbolism. Modern men and women must find some adequate symbolism for their new and expanding ideas, ideals, and loyalties. And then they make this very powerful statement, and this higher symbolism of a higher civilization. So this is very future-oriented, right? This symbolism and this culture is something that they are hoping will grow out of the evolutionary movement of our Urantia revelation. This higher symbolism of a higher civilization must be predicated on the concept of the fatherhood of God and be pregnant with the mighty ideal of the brotherhood of man. So the two central tenets of spiritual family life, right? Parent-child relationship and the sister-brother relationship. They're saying this new symbolism must embody these powerful principles of living relationship between us and God and amongst each other. And then they go on to say, no symbolic spiritual culture can endure and contribute to the progress of social civilization and individual spiritual attainment unless it is based on the biologic, sociologic, and religious significance of the home. So again, there's the family theme. And think about families and the role that they play in the continuity of culture and civilization, right? So they go on to say a surviving cult or culture must symbolize that which is permanent in the presence of unceasing change. There has to be continuity, right, over generations. It must glorify that which unifies the stream of ever-changing social metamorphosis. So what we're going to do now is take a look at two examples of what they're speaking of a symbolism. right? One we're pretty familiar with. We're not going to go into in depth on it, but the first one is the symbolic phrase, the kingdom of heaven, which is what Jesus settled on as the primary description, the primary symbolic phrase for his symbolism and culture that he was hoping would evolve out of his ministry. And they say, the revelators say, that he would have much preferred a symbolism that centered on the metaphor of the family as the central symbol. But the conditions of his day made him compromise. He was forced to compromise. So we're gonna look at a couple of passages here. They say Jesus sought to substitute many terms for the kingdom, but always without success. Among others, he used the family of God, and it's interesting that that's the first of the phrases they describe. The Father's will, the friends of God, the fellowship of believers, and a series of a few other phrases. And they say that he explained that the kingdom idea, this is to the apostles, was not the best way to illustrate man's relationship to God, right? That he employed such figures of speech because the Jewish people were expecting the kingdom and because John had preached in terms of the coming kingdom. And, additionally, the primary form of government and of civil society back in his day, all over the world, were kingdoms, monarchies. And unlike our current day, where there are very few kingdoms left, it's a passing form of society. And really, there are representative forms of government. And there's been the emergence and the rise of the importance of the family institution as the conveyor, the continuity of cultural forward momentum, which is a universal cultural norm or symbol, this experience of family. Every human being, no matter what culture they're part of, shares the family experience in some way as the bedrock of their lives experientially. But basically, they say that Jesus said that the people of another age will better understand the gospel of the kingdom when it is presented in terms of expressive of the family relationship. So that's a powerful statement. And even more pointedly, in paper 103, Jesus declared that man is a child of God. The creature-creator relationship was placed on a child-parent basis. God becomes a loving father to his mortal sons and daughters. All ceremonials, not a legitimate part of such an intimate family relationship, are forever abrogated. So this implication shows up in many, many places in the Urantia revelation, that this new and higher symbolism of a higher civilization that they're pointing to is really, they're hoping it can be grounded in the primary metaphor of the family of God, moving out of the kingdom concept, which is it's a metaphor of obedience to a power source, right? Really focused on the will of God. There's not much love between a king and a king's subjects, right? So they are really hoping, and Jesus is hoping, that the people of another age, which I think is us, will really move ahead with the family of God metaphor as a much more powerful conveyor of the nature of our relationship with God, of God's nature as a compassionate, loving, parental presence in our lives intimately, and also conveying the nature of our relationships with each other desirably as sisters and brothers in God's family. So here is a possible conception of a symbolism that flows out of this primary symbol of the family of God. And remember, a symbolism is a constellation of precepts or concepts that sit under the rubric of an overarching metaphor, which in this case is the family of God and a way of life in the family of God. But it incorporates the gospel. It's a way of holding and understanding the core elements of the gospel in a way that allows us to live them out, to hold on to them, to remember them, and to not lose sight of them, and to actualize them, to realize them, and then to convey them, to communicate them to the broader culture. And so what I'm going to share with you now, it reflects about, you might say, 40 years of research in the text and a lot of prayer and reflection on how we can go about engaging in this process of cultural uplift and transformation of our global culture. First in the Urantia movement, and then in spreading this symbolism of spiritual family to uplift global culture, the global culture that's likely to emerge over the next centuries and over the next 1,000 years. So the central phrase is the way of life in the family of God, and a simpler way to describe it is the family way, kind of like the Eightfold Path, or it's a way of communicating it, the family way, a way of life in the family of God. And the two central precepts here are the primary truths that Jesus articulates over and over, and the revelators articulate over and over throughout the 2,000 pages of the text. Back almost 100 years ago, the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. Perhaps in more modern phraseology, less masculinely based, the spiritual parent-child relationship and the spiritual sister-brother relationship. But it's the same reality, right? It's our parent-child relationship with God and our sister-brother relationships with each other as the two central precepts in this way of life in the family of God. And then these other elements are, in a way, qualifiers or descriptions that unpack these first two primary elements in this way of life. One is the indwelling spirit, that the parent-child relationship is incredibly intimate. It's not some theoretical reality far away in the cosmos, right? The indwelling spirit makes the parent-child relationship close and interior and constant, right? So it says we have an opportunity to develop this intimate relationship with God as our loving spiritual father and mother, in a sense, both paternal and maternal qualities flowing in our relationship with God. And then a second qualifier is the will of God, that God, in God's relationship with us and flowing out into our relationships with each other, God has a purpose. And as my wonderful brother Gard says, the purpose of God is to aim for the perfection, to achieve the perfection of God ultimately in eternity. But God wants us to live a certain way, right? God wants us to not only be in intimate communion with God in worship, but to be in loving relationship with each other all of the time. So God has will and purpose and plan and direction. That's very much a part of this whole experience of the family of God. It's directional. It moves somewhere. It's purposive. And then the quality, as Gard was mentioning, of love, it pervades all family relationships. It's the fundamental energy and dynamic of flow, in a sense, between us and God, vertically, and between each other, flowing down into our lives in worship and out through our relationships with each other in profound service. Love is the essence of all of our relationships. And then the qualifier of eternal life is very, very important. All of these realities and all of these relationships are just at their most beginning fledgling level, right? Our relationship with God is going to be unfolding endlessly. And our relationships with eventually probably millions of beings and brothers and sisters that we will come to know and have living relationship with over billions of years. So this spiritual sister-brother relationship is also an eternal reality. So the eternal nature of these things qualifies all of this. All of these features sort of cross-reference with each other. And then lastly, faith as, in a sense, the opening door that allows us to mobilize and pour ourselves into these realities, into this whole way of life in the family of God. Faith is really critically important, mobilizing our faith. It's the peace. God gives us all of these other 6 realities and this whole way of life. What God also gives us is the capacity to exercise faith, but we must exercise it in all of these realities in order to make them increasingly and eternally come alive and become experiential. So again, think of what you just saw as that set of elements as the skeletal structure around which grows the living and dynamic body of personal spiritual experience. It's a set of touchstones, right? I mean, obviously, it's just a set of words. But if you take each one and you allow it to blossom in your life and become the fountain of personal spiritual experience, these realities will grow endlessly. Each one of those realities is a paradise level phenomenon, really. It will carry us from here all the way to paradise into God's presence. So now, the last idea that I want to share with you before we open it up to our panel to a broader discussion is that what we've been speaking of, a symbolic spiritual culture, a culture which is a whole way of life, and a symbolism that captures it and conveys it and allows us to work with it. If it is going to function fully and effectively, it needs to unfold on three different levels. The first level is in the culture of our personal spiritual lives, right? It has to become alive in who we are and how we live. That's why the emphasis on a way of life in the family of God. It's a whole way to live, right? It's not just an idea, it's a whole life. Second, so the first level of the manifestation of symbolic culture is in our personal spiritual lives. Secondly, this kind of culture manifests in our group culture. And in particular, in our situation, it manifests in the emerging Urantia movement culture. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. And thirdly, personal culture, group culture, the Urantia movement. Third is the development of national cultures, and even on a much larger scale, especially over the last 100 years, in the emergence of the beginnings of a truly global culture or civilization. So personal, group culture, and last would be national and global civilizational culture. So at this point, I want to share with you three websites. I want to share with you some resources, right? And I'm going to show these to you here in just a moment. If you're interested in getting more deeply into how to engage in this, it can be a little elusive because it's such a vast reality, how to engage in this process of spiritual, cultural growth and transformation. The first is a webpage on the Urantia University website, a weekly worship service on Sundays, focused on the realization, the universal family of God. And this is all about manifesting culture, right? Symbolic culture. And it's focused on these core truths. And there are several segments to the 90-minute event. There's teaching and inspiration, some small breakout group discussions, and then quiet worship, and then a large group fellowship sharing. And then at the bottom, you see all the videos of the recorded events that are on YouTube. And they're all focused on essentially the family way, a way of life of the family of God, these 7 core truths, and a way of life and spiritual family. So that's the second resource I wanted to share, the YouTube URL. And the third is, in a sense, it's a vision piece of a future hoped for reality, right? And it doesn't exist currently, but it's what a broad cultural movement around the family of God symbolism might look like in the far future, right? A way of life in the family of God. And this is at familyofgodfellowship.org. And this is the purpose of that future reality. This is important. In order to be potent, these truths must come alive in our daily experience. They cannot simply be ideas we understand and believe. They must be truths we increasingly live out and become. The power of the family way lies in its ability to unify human experience if it becomes an actual way of living. There's great life coherence for the believer in the integration of family relationships on all conceivable levels, from the inner family to the home family, from the faith family of the local fellowship to the interfaith family of all believers, and from the global family of all human beings to the universal family of all beings in God's vast creation. So in summary, and I'm just going to wrap up here, my best understanding of this whole process of cultural transformation and uplift is that we first need to clarify the basic elements of our personal spiritual culture and change our lives. It's empty unless we become different, right? We have to become the embodiment of these realities if we're going to be powerful in conveying them to other people. Then if we can do that, if we clarify that to ourselves, then we can grow and incorporate this symbolic culture in our own individual lives. Then on that basis, we can begin to incorporate the family of God symbolism into the emerging Urantia movement culture, so that increasingly these truths and priorities of spiritual family life can become living realities in our own Urantia movement group culture. And then on that basis, I think we can begin seriously to think about spreading our group culture out to the world, especially if it's spiritually fragrant. And so eventually, over generations and centuries, and especially if the Urantia movement becomes a broader and more diffuse influence that spreads through various national cultures and global culture, we can actually hope to have a growing impact on the world around us. And I actually think that if all this can happen, then if we look ahead 500 to 1,000 years from now, when the midwayers and angels look down at our global culture, and increasingly, if they see the living out of these ideals of the loving relationships we can have in the family of God, as spiritual sons and daughters with our celestial parents, and as sisters and brothers to each other, if they see that happening, then I think they will say to us, all of us, job well done.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Marvin. And we have a large panel today, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation about this.
Okay.
Well, so I can sort of start us off with the conversation if you'd like.
Yes, please do. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just open to any of your thoughts around these three levels of evolution of this culture and this symbolism around spiritual family. First is in our own personal spiritual lives. Secondly, in the evolving Urantia movement culture, which I think this two-day seminar is an outstanding example of how the family of God and spiritual family is becoming prominent in the Urantia movement culture. And then thirdly, if we grow large enough, how that Urantia movement culture can begin to inseminate and uplift over centuries, really, and generations, global culture. So Gard, I know you've thought about this a great deal. Please go ahead.
We've talked about it a lot, and I just want to shout out to my dear sister, beautiful sister Judy, who helps lead what's called the Cultural Advisory Committee. And I think as we extend this revelation into the world, my question for you is, do the metaphors and do the teachings that you're sharing, are they transcultural, or do we have to adapt them to local conditions as the revelation was adapted to local conditions?
That's a great question, Gard. I would say there is some, but I would say minor tweaking and adaptation. And of course, the principle that's in the revelation in many places of bringing people from local cultures to a training experience, which we're looking at trying to do with this teacher education program that Urantia University and Urantia Foundation and the Fellowship and UAI are all working together. We have several people coming from Africa and people from, there were some folks from Australia and from Mexico. So the principle of bringing people in and letting them take the core teachings and adapt them and prepare themselves to teach is an important one. But these concepts that center around the family of God symbolism are sufficiently universal that anybody in any culture is going to take the concept of God's presence within, or the will of God, or a way of life in spiritual family, and they're going to be able to easily translate them, because spiritual family and family as an experience is a cultural universal, which that's very powerful for a symbolism. So yeah, I think it's doable, and I think we need to be sensitive about how to do it.
Stevie, you want to jump in?
The point about, of course, changing the language about the kingdom of God into the family of God in terms of Jesus, personal relationship with God, and then how to actualize the spiritual ideas in our culture. For me, it's pointing out where it's happening, because it's evolving in our culture. And I think it's important in terms of the Urantia movement culture too, but I'm looking at where it's happening and where I am in my work. And I had something exciting that I want to share with you. For me, what's coming up is to train, I've done parent training all my life. It's kind of full circle. And this whole adventure, Marriage and Family Symposium, has really brought some other thoughts in. What's the most important thing to do? What's needed and what works and what can we do next? And for me, it's continuing that training in terms of communication, listening to each other in the family, and how to run a family meeting, the family council sessions, and more. And something exciting happened. I was asked to go back. I'm retired, but I do marriage and family therapy privately, just part-time. But I was asked to go back into the public schools as an elementary school counselor, and I did. So I went from April to June till this week, and then they asked me to come back next year. So I'm really excited I get to do that. The principal, it's a bilingual school. It's one of a model in the whole country, and so it's English and Spanish. So there's a lot of, and it's so diverse in our area in Northern Virginia. So the principal is wanting to do a social emotional learning, and so I went to a training, and in the training it was by Yale, and what stood out for me is the family is the most important culturator in our culture, and that's in the research. So I was excited about that, and I talked to my principal about it. She's excited too. So if we're going to really do this whole emotional intelligence in the whole school, where you train the family, the students, the staff, then what about the family? How can we do that? And we have in Arlington County family coordinators. So we're going to work together on that. And maybe we can train all the families to run family council sessions, or in communication skills as an extension of getting this going in the school, especially since the research shows that the family is in the most important enculturator. So I see it's evolving, and maybe, if we can find out where it's happening and point that out, and, reinforce that in whatever way is needed in a sensitive way. But, and I have to do it in a sensitive way, because kind of working with the principal and getting buy-in from the rest of the staff.
What's so interesting is the challenges are almost endless and endlessly varied in terms of how to move forward in this evolutionary process and bring these ideas and this symbolism and marry it up and try and merge it into the existing culture around us. There are lots of challenges, and it's an art form. They gave us a revelation, but our evolutionary movement is an artistic expression that we are responsible for evolving, right? And it's very, very creative, and it's very challenging. One of the key objections to the whole idea of the family of God as a core symbolism for changing culture is that so many people have grown up in really messed up families and have been really damaged in family. And what we have to do is really powerfully state an ideal, and that is, you can project from your family of origin onto God, right? And then you're going to feel terrible about God because your parents really messed you up or abused you. But the direction of influence needs to move the other way, from the top down, right? We need to convey the powerful ideal of God's incredible love and compassion and nurture of us in worship, and that is available as a spiritual reparenting experience that can profoundly alter and go back retroactively and heal us and change us from the family of origin experiences that may have messed us up. So the direction of influence needs to be from top down, from the ideal of the family of God, and in a healing fashion and in a transformative fashion. And as therapists, that's very powerful to work with that, So thank you.
I know what's been working in terms of bringing that up in a culture where they're not talking about spirit or God, is in terms of, everybody's doing mental health. So we just took out the mental and add healthy living, healthy balanced living. So for healthy balanced living, you have to have goals like, how do you take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, environmentally, and more. I added morally. I learned that from Sadler. So the moral too. So how to have healthy, balanced life, and then people are focusing on whatever level they are. That's something that's worked, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, you have to work with where people are coming from. Well, thank you, Stevie.
I just wanted to say, Richard Keeler told me a long time ago that he was told by Dr. Sadler that there were 4 priorities of living. And I have shared these with my children and my grandchildren, with my employees, and with my friends. And the first is health. And because without your health, you are really no good to anyone, not even yourself. So you want to preserve your health. And I expanded that with my grandkids and my kids to include mental, physical, spiritual health. You have to address all 3 of those things to truly be a holistically healthy person. The second is your work. So that's the work of the sphere you're on, which is what for all of us. If we have a family, if we're growing a family, it's our family, and it's the work we do to support and maintain that family and ourselves. And then the third, interestingly enough for him, was the work of the revelation. So to me, that equates to whatever passionate work you want to do to serve your fellow man. And the fourth was the trifles of living. And to break it down that way makes a lot of sense even to my grandkids, because I tell them in that trifles of living come video games. So, but I want to say what you taught resonates with me, because my whole life has been about home and family. From the youngest I can remember, I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to have a home and family. I got married young. I was 18. My husband and I bought a house. 3 years later, we had a baby and a business. Today, I have a business without my husband. Unfortunately, we lost him almost 9 years ago, but he left a great legacy for my children and many opportunities. And my son and my daughter and son-in-law and my 2 oldest grandsons work together with me in that business. It enables me to work now from home because they're doing a great job. I actually might get to retire one day and pass the business on. So, but what you taught is what I have lived in my life, with the passion of wanting a home and a family. And I think I started reading the Urantia book at 18. So it is that unconscious culture that it created in my mind about investing in child culture and home culture. I was a mom when it wasn't that popular to be a stay-at-home mom. That's what I wanted to do most, but I also had to work in the business and learn accounting to run, set up and run an office. And so I've had both experiences, but I can tell you the most gratifying thing in my life, and the thing I've watched blossom, are the relationships between my children, both at home and growing. My kids are 10 years apart, but they work together, and their brother-sister relationship has had to evolve into even a working relationship. So it continues on. It goes on to the grandkids. There's so much room for soul growth. And so home, family, it's the foundation of everything in life. And it just very naturally and logically goes global.
Well, that's so interesting. Thank you, Judy. I mean, and that's just very inspiring as well. What's interesting to me is what you just shared with us, I think is true for almost all human beings, is that experiences around family are universally some of the most impactful and powerful experience that every human being has. So I don't think you're alone in that. And the power of the family of God symbolism is when you tie that experiential reality, which has taken up decades in our lives, right? You tie that to what is going on in the universe and the cosmos, that it's all about family all the way up to paradise. It just gets larger and larger and more profound spiritually. And that if we can get started on that spiritual family experience with God as our parent, that's why Jesus made it front and center. The parent-child relationship is because he wanted us to get started on that and make it the foundation of our relationships with God and then with each other. And then it marries up or ties together the human family experience with the celestial family experience. And then it's really powerful, very powerful.
We have a question from the audience that's been holding from Ruthie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she wants to know, well, how can we move forward with the ideal love and mercy of the family of God without throwing away the law and justice of the kingdom of God?
Oh, interesting. Interesting. That's a great question. I don't think we need to throw it away at all. The question is not one or the other. The question is what's primary and what's secondary, right? Because what Jesus said is the order and the law and the justice of God flows second and out of the primary love that God has for us as a parent, to us as spiritual children. And one of the things that you discover if you're a good parent is that and Sigmund Freud said this. I don't like Sigmund Freud for many reasons, but he did say that the two fundamental realities in human life are, in German, Leben und Arbeiten, right? Love and work. So there's love, and then there's structure and law and guidance and order, right? Both are important, but the structure and order of the kingdom of God really flows out of the primary love of the family of God. So you put that front and center, and then the structure and order flow out of it, out of the love. Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you.
And it's a great answer too, Marvin.
No, I am.
Vicky's got something.
Yeah, please, Vicky.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the term human family right now, rather than family of God. It seems like in much of the world, mainstream media, let's just say in the mainstream media, the idea of human family seems to be pretty well accepted. But what really bothers people is when you start bringing God in, and that's what seems to be, because we live in these secular times, of course, and everybody's got different opinions about who God is and how he or she acts in our lives. And then one other comment I wanted to make, back when Jesus was talking, was with Ganad from India, I remember Ganad saying in the paper called Our Religion or something, he said something to the effect of, when I think about the brotherhood of man, it terrifies me. And I'm sure that there are probably places in our world where the thought of the brotherhood of man terrifies people. Maybe because of prejudices, or, maybe you've lived in a caste system your entire life or something like that, which was the case of Ganad being from India. But I think, getting back to my original point, I think the idea of the human family is becoming pretty well established. It's just this idea of the family of God that is going to take longer.
You talk about the humanistic idea of God maybe being really questionable or difficult to accept. Mm-hmm. What we have to understand is we are on a rebellion planet. This is a bizarre environment we are part of. On every other normal world, the idea that God doesn't exist is an absolutely aberrant philosophy. It's nuts. It's cosmic insanity, right? On a normal world. It doesn't exist. No one would even talk seriously about it. On our world, it's a dominant philosophy because the Luciferian philosophy is unfortunately alive and well. It's our job as an evolutionary movement associated with a major epical revelation to change that. 1,000 years from now, it should be really absurd for the idea of humanistic or atheistic assumptions to be prevalent, that should be a piece of history. We should be involved in changing that, but it is challenging, no doubt about it, but we should be addressing it. You know, the other thing you mentioned, what was your second
Gannon,
question?
I talked about Gannon being terrified.
It is terrifying. It is terrifying without the parent-child relationship. When you are sustained in the parent-child relationship, the idea of the vast sister-brother relationships becomes sustainable and even enjoyable.
This is wonderful, Marvin. Olga.
Yeah.
Well, at least in my country, some people consider that the idea of family is something very conservative, or something from the past, that we have to transcend the idea of family in favor of other, I know, human groups, or well, some people talk about the tribe and we in a tribe instead of a family. So it's really challenging, and if we add to that most of those people also don't believe in God, the situation is very challenging. So how can we reach to that people to make them think about that another family is possible, or another religion is possible. So it's something that, it's on my mind constantly. So
That's
what are your thoughts?
Yes, no, very, very understandably. I think it's on all of our minds. You know, they speak about our times as a transitional era full of turbulence and upheaval and confusion for many, many people. And they say that religion must provide a stabilizing foundation kind of role in these times of transition. And they say that these times of transition will not settle down complacently for a millennium, for 1,000 years. So our role as an evolutionary movement with this idea of spiritual family as stabilizing and providing continuity is a critical role for us to be engaged in. Is it challenging? Is it difficult? Absolutely. It will be difficult, but we must rise to that challenge, and we must carry forward really with real courage and faith and say, this is the way forward. This will bring you solace and order and nurture and nourishment in relationship with God as you go through these crazy transitions of this culture. And eventually we will come out the other side, I think. So it's part of our role as an evolutionary movement, I think. Yeah, I love your question earlier too, Olga. You know, to me, this is one of the most important things for the Urantia movement to be thinking about, is how do we do this? So, guard, please.
So, to Vicky's point, most Christians, Jews, Muslims, most people who have an image of God have a barbaric and abhorrent image of God. And we can't just foist this. So, and to my dear sister Olga's point, we've sailed out of the harbor of traditions. So that the institution of religion is going to change. There's going to be really important changes in these institutions. So it feels to me like, as a community, we need to be just a hair more strategic.
Yeah.
How we market these things. Because if you go out and say, fatherhood of God, brotherhood of man, I'm going to tell you, I had a horrible father. I had to climb outside of my house to get to my room because I didn't want to be near him. And so I'm asking you, Marvin, Paul was a strategic thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking you whether or not, beyond homecoming, beyond a conference or two, beyond the TEP, have you done any strategic thinking about how these truths can be marketed in a way that is acceptable and allows people to experience it, And have you done any strategic thinking about, with the fifth epical revelation, how should we proceed? I'm looking at my dear sister Judy, and we know that we received the revelation far in advance of its worldwide acceptance, and that that world awaits spiritually hungry people. So talk to me about strategy and about how you convey the fatherhood of God when most people's idea of God is an abhorrent dictator.
Well, there's so much I could say in response to what you're asking, Gard, and it's a very critical question about a strategic approach. It's essentially, how do we structure this endeavor of cultural uplift and transformation? What do we lead with, right? What do we put front and center so that the first thing we speak about as we approach people doesn't alienate them, we don't lose them, right? The first thing I would say is, all of these things that you describe about the existing religions that are so alienating, all of them flow out of the kingdom of God concept. They're all about power and violence and dominance and obedience as a subject of the king, right? So as soon as you begin to leave that old metaphor behind of power relationship and dominance, right, which is all associated with kingdom and subject, right? And you move into the metaphor of spiritual family and compassion and caring. You do have to move into the spiritual reparenting thing as front and center, right? Because so many people come with damaged experiences of early family life. So what you lead with is what you so often encourage us to lead with is, you have to first, you can talk about the concept of spiritual family, but you have to lead with an exposure to a living experience of nurturing love interiorly in worship. When you introduce people to an experience, right, where they feel the love, and you and I have done this, we know people who come with no concept, right, and they taste the experience of God's love in their inner worship, everything changes for them, and they're open in a radically new way because they've been touched and changed inside, and they are hungry for that love. So if you introduce them first to the experience of being loved by God interiorly in worship, then all of the rest of it flows very easily because they really want to get it. They've tasted it, and they will not be satisfied without the whole picture of spiritual relationship. And then it begins to trickle out and change their relationships with all of the people around them, right? So the strategy is, the front and center thing is the worship experience and nurture, love, and how it changes you as the entry into the family of God experience. Yeah, Judy.
Yeah, I would like to springboard off of that. You know, my original family was troubled. My father was abusive to my mother. And my relationship through reading the Urantia book, and I also had an adopted father who was very religious and so had a strong faith, and my mother too. And I came from a family where that was a tradition. So I was blessed in that respect. My natural father also had faith, but he was a troubled soul. My reading the Urantia book, and I think this can be true for people like, I know this has got to have been part of Gard's experience. When you have had a parent who is so flawed, and we're all flawed as parents, aren't we? None of our children have had perfect experiences.
Well, every single one of us has been raised by parents who were less than perfect. So that's a universal. So you're right.
That's universal.
Judy, I'm the godfather of Marvin's two daughters, and I would say they came out perfect. So, you know.
Well, I want to say that you can learn to see a flawed parent and even a severely troubled parent that you had, you know, wounds from as a child, from the perspective of what was their childhood like? What were their issues? How were they wounded? How did that contribute to their ability to step up and take the role? And so I think when you say that you introduce a person to that loving God within, and they feel the presence of that God, that's what that engenders, is ability to try to understand your parent, and the healing then begins. So
Thank
my
you.
kids would tell you they didn't have a perfect childhood, but I think the thing that really, they both have families. They serve their families. My son is right now coaching his 10-year-old for the 3rd year baseball team. He is my net operating manager. You know, I'm so pleased they felt secure enough to invest in a family and to create these little potentially eternal beings. And I forgot what I was going to say next, but I want to tell you this. I have a 10-year-old grandson I was picked up from school, was taking home, and was sharing with him how important I felt it was to include God in our life, because he is just the best friend and resource you could possibly have. And why would we ever exclude the best resource that we ever had? And I said, why do you think God is someone you would want in your life? And he goes, because God is goated. And I said, well, I don't know what that means. He goes, greatest of all time. So I felt like, but I want to say that I think it's loyalty to family that really makes the difference amidst all of our frailties, our vicissitudes, our flaws as parents. If you have a loyalty to that concept and to child culture, somehow kids can survive that and get the foundation to then live that too. And isn't that what really creates it, is when the generations succeedingly live that?
I keep going back to this. What you have to do strategically, this goes to Gard's question of strategy. You cannot play to people's tendency to moan and groan and start with how screwed up their experience has been around around family, right? What you have to do strategically is start at the other end, at the divine end, and say, here's an experience that can radically reorient and change you and your whole history, right? You're never going to change. This is speaking as a therapist of 50 years work, right? You're never going to change people by starting at what they grew up with. You have to change people by starting at what's possible in their relationship with God, and then that changes them, and then everything changes in retrospect, right? So Gard loves me to tell this story about the atheist physicist, right? I had a client come in, and he had a really screwed up family of origin, was in great pain, right? And he was a professional physicist and a profound atheist. And as I did with just about all my clients, I said, you know, there is a possibility here. You know, I know you don't believe in God, but if there was such a thing as God, and you could get into a connection with it somehow internally, right, through this a method I might share with you, and you could feel that love, and it would profoundly change things for you, would you want it? And he was startled, and he said, well, I don't think it exists, but if it did, yeah, I would. I said, okay, you're a good scientist. He was a very rigorous scientist. I said, let's do a little experiment. Here's the hypothesis. This thing exists. If you engage in this process of centering or worship, and you say to God, I want to open to your presence and your action, and you sit for 20 minutes twice a day, et cetera, and I taught him the method. And you go away, I said, and you, if you can say to God, if you're there and if you'll do this for me, I want it. I say, just do that, engage in the method, see what happens as an experiment. He went away for 2 weeks. He came back, he walked into the office. I said, well, how did things go? And he said, I don't know what the hell that is, but I am not stopping it. He didn't believe it, but he had experienced something that had changed him so much he couldn't explain it. 6 months later, he was up at Keating's retreat center. He believed in God. He believed there was, all his beliefs changed because he had the experience. That's our strategy. We have to introduce people to the nurture of God inside of them, loving them. Once they taste that, everything changes for them. All their objections go away, and they become open to the reality of God. So that has to be our strategy. It has to be living and relational and experiential. Nothing less will do, So yeah, it's a big job, but I mean, this is what our movement really needs to embrace, I think, is all these ideals around spiritual family. Stevie, please.
atheists, they have a concept of God, they just don't believe in it. So how do you then, give them another concept? And Judy, what you were saying too, and both in Gawryn too, about some of the family relationships with their earthly mother and father. There's a wonderful, I've been using the Japanese methods of quiet therapy. I don't know if you know about that, but you take each significant relationship, and it's some journaling. Some people go 2 weeks and they do a retreat to do it in Japan. But you talk about the things that the gifts that each of, say you take your father, what gifts did he give me? What troubles did he cause me? And what troubles did I cause him? And what gifts did I give him? And it kind of balances out. And then there's a forgiveness process. So it's a way to let go of it. But that's been really wonderful. And my original answer to the Gawryn's question, I wrote it down, is that I've been working on at first for the World Parliament of Religions in Toronto. I was working on this book about, listing the concepts of the major religions, and then the corresponding quotes to the Urantia book. And I took it around to the different booths asking for their help just to see it, to validate it. And they would say, yes, yes. And they would read the concepts of the Urantia book. Now, I think it's really important to have the quotes from the different, text and how that corresponds to what the commonalities are. But what came up for me is how to share the fatherhood of God. So in Islam, there's the 99 names of God. So you can have the names of God, then you can have the qualities of the nature of God. What beautiful papers in that first part of the book about the nature of God, the love of God. And then you have the fatherhood of God and the motherhood of God. And there's even names like for daughters of the what was it? Sons of God, daughters of God. There's names for that. And there's Mother Buddha. And so it's kind of exciting. So I've been collecting it. So if anybody else has any, let me know. But that's, I think, a way to use the language and share what we have from the Urantia book.
That's the beauty of this opportunity we have, is the core of what we have to do is very essential and elemental, right? But the varieties of ways that we can do it are endless. We can come up with 100,000 different ways to do the same sharing of the spiritual family experience. But I want to go back to what Gawryn emphasized, and I have found to be incredibly true. If you introduce people to the worship experience where God's love can be felt by them, they're on their way.
Well, Cher had something she wanted to share before we finish.
How do we restore self-respect? And the answers I got from Gawryn and from you is you provide the necessities just to begin with, and then you expect responsibility, and then you introduce them to the Father through worship. And that to me is just a real practical, in a box solution on a one-to-one person. And the other comment that I had about parents was that if your grown kids are good to you, that means you were a good parent.
If someone were to tune in to this YouTube video a year from now, 2 years from now, they're looking around and they say, how do I practically day-to-day implement what's being talked about? How do I do it day to day?
That's a great question. I'd say very simply, focus on the spiritual parent-child relationship, get loved by God in worship, go out and serve. So it's like worship and service, right? Parent-child relationship and sister-brother relationship in loving service. That's the essence of it, I would say.
Let compassion be the bridge between love and service. Without compassion, you're not getting to real service.
Well, it's exactly. And the thing is, in that parent-child relationship, God gives us the compassion to be able to really live out the compassion in our sister-brother relationships with each other. So I want to say thank you. This has been what an incredible panel. You guys have been amazing. Thank you so much.